The land kept its secrets well. Night after night, year after year, century after century, the old Bell property lay untouched by anything that called itself human. The grass grew wild in crooked waves. The trees leaned inward like tall, silent mourners. And the wind, when it dared to cross that soil, moved with cautious restraint, slipping low to the ground as if afraid to disturb whatever might be listening beneath. To most travelers, the area looked like any abandoned piece of rural Tennessee. An overgrown clearing, a scatter of half-rotted fence posts, a few stones marking where a house once stood. But to those who understood the whispers of legend, this place was not empty. It was waiting. Even now, as dusk melted into a cold silver night, the entire property vibrated with a pressure too ancient to name. A static hum, subtle but unmistakable, rippled beneath the soil. Long-buried memories stirred. Old shadows twitched in the corners of the dying light. And somewhere deep underground, beneath the broken foundation of the Bell homestead, something began to stretch. Not awakening fully. Not yet. Just remembering. Remembering the scent of fear. The warmth of breath. The way a human heartbeat quickened when it sensed it was not alone. The land shifted almost imperceptibly. The haunting had begun again. Hey guys. Welcome to another episode of stories that will make you question whether you're truly alone right now. You're listening to Silent Scream Chronicles. Do well to subscribe, share, and hit the like button for more tales to come. And also let me know where you're listening from in the comments. Moonrise washed over the old farm with a pale, ghostly light. The foundation stones scattered across the clearing glimmered faintly, capturing the glow like fragments of bone rising from the grave. Grass bent in unnatural patterns. Circles, spirals, lines that pointed inward as though charting a map to some hidden, pulsing center. The earth did not lie flat here. It bulged in places, swelled in others, forming subtle mounds that looked disturbingly organic, almost like ribs of a buried creature slowly inhaling. Every few seconds, the ground gave a faint tremor. Heartbeat. Low. Heavy. Growing stronger. Nothing alive should have been able to create such vibrations, yet they rolled through the clearing like a pulse beneath flesh. The air tightened with each throb, compressing the night into a suffocating stillness. The animals of the forest felt it first. Owls silenced their cries. Deer froze mid-stride. Raccoons retreated into burrows, trembling. Even the insects stopped humming, as though the sound would draw attention. The forest held its breath. The land listened. And the presence beneath the soil began to rise. Far beyond the clearing, a lone figure walked the narrow dirt path leading toward the Bell property. Their pace was steady, their posture tense but determined. A backpack bounced lightly against their shoulders, filled with equipment, audio recorders, a handheld camera, old maps, and a leather-bound journal thick with notes on Appalachian hauntings. The outsider had traveled far for this investigation, driven not by thrill but by obsession. Every scrap of lore about the Bell which had pulled them deeper, from old court documents to whispered testimonies of descendants who refused to speak above a whisper. Most people avoided the area. But the outsider walked willingly into the dark. Their flashlight cast a narrow beam across the path, illuminating twisted roots and patches of wild moss. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew. Not naturally cold. Not the soft chill of southern autumn nights. This cold cut inward, as though the temperature dropped from within the body rather than outside it. The outsiders slowed their steps. The forest was too quiet. Even the sound of their boots seemed swallowed, muffled by an unseen weight settling over the trees. A pressure formed behind them, subtle at first like the sensation of being watched from far away. Then it grew, shifted, moved. The outsider paused. Their breath formed a faint cloud. But the night was not cold enough for that. They checked their audio recorder. Blinking light. Faint crackle. Then a low, rhythmic vibration, steady and unnatural. The same rhythm pulsing in the soil ahead. The outsiders' doubts sharpened, but their curiosity pushed them forward. The stories might have been exaggerated. The legends may have warped through time. But something about this land remained disturbingly alive. They continued. The forest allowed them passage. Now, the outsider emerged into the clearing. Moonlight poured over the abandoned field, revealing the broken remains of the bell house. Stones jutted upward in tilted angles like the remnants of a shattered grave marker. The grass swayed gently, too gently, moving in patterns that did not align with the night breeze. It moved in spirals, toward the stones, toward the center, toward something underneath. The outsider felt the shift immediately. A cold ripple slid across their arms, raising goosebumps. The air vibrated with a low hum that grew louder as they approached the stones. The hum synced with their heartbeat, then overtook it, then drowned it out entirely. Their chest tightened. Breathing became shallow. The recorder in their hand glowed faintly. The outsider knelt beside the largest stone, brushing dried leaves away from its base. The soil beneath was warm, unnaturally so, as if something deep below radiated heat. The hum intensified. The ground trembled. The outsider leaned closer, unaware of the thin line of shadow creeping behind them, stretching across the grass like a hand reaching from the dark. As their fingers brushed the stone, the earth pulsed. A pressure burst upward, gentle but forceful enough to feel like breath exhaled directly against the outsider's face. Not wind, not gas, not natural movement. Breath, warm, voice, human light. The outsider jerked back. Their flashlight flickered violently. The hum deepened, now vibrating in the bones rather than the air. The soil beneath the stone shifted. Something was moving. Something was pushing upward from the depths. Something remembered being disturbed. And now it wanted to see who had returned. The outsider steadied themselves, forcing their breath into controlled rhythm despite the pressure squeezing their lungs. The hum wrapped around their body like invisible coils, tightening, releasing, tightening again. The forest behind them sank into deeper silence. Not a single leaf rustled. Not a single creature moved. Even the moonlight dimmed, as if the sky itself recoiled from the clearing below. Then the ground changed. The grass flattened in a perfect circular pattern around the foundation stones, pressing outward in a slow ripple. The soil depressed in certain spots as though invisible feet stepped lightly across it, testing their weight, measuring the distance, deciding the angle of approach. The outsider's flashlight pointed toward the ground. The beam warped, bent, stretched unnaturally toward one direction, as though drawn to something their eyes could not yet see. The outsider stepped back. Shadows moved. Not shadows cast by moonlight. Shadows with weight, purpose, direction. They converged on the foundation stones, sliding across the grass in thin, sharp lines. The outsider felt their pulse spike. Their breath froze. The shadows coiled. And the very first whisper of the presence reached the surface. A vibration in the soil. A swelling in the air. A tightening of reality around a central point. And then, the ground cracked. Only slightly. Barely visible. But enough. A thin, black vapor seeped upward, swirling in slow spirals. Did not drift like smoke. It moved with intention, twisting toward the outsider before retracting, then circling the stones again. The presence had surfaced, half-formed, half-remembered. It was not yet strong, but it was aware. And it had found a new witness. The outsider's feet shifted uneasily across the grass, leaving shallow impressions that vanished almost instantly. The black vapor above the foundation twisted and writhed, pulsing with a life of its own. The air seemed to thicken, becoming almost viscous, pressing against the outsider as if the night itself had grown heavier. The humming from beneath the soil intensified, no longer subtle. It began to resonate within the outsider's chest, matching the rhythm of a heartbeat, yet not their own. Each pulse sent vibrations up their legs, through their spine, twisting tendons and tightening muscles involuntarily. The trees surrounding the clearing leaned inward, their twisted branches forming unnatural arches that funneled the pressure toward the center. The moonlight fractured across the field, catching the vapor at strange angles, casting fleeting shapes across the grass. shapes that resembled human figures, elongated and distorted, frozen in moments of silent terror. The outsider took a tentative step backward, but the earth responded. A small mound of soil shifted beneath their foot, as if nudged by a hidden hand. The vibration jumped from the ground to the soles of their boots. Then it climbed higher, wrapping around their knees, climbing their spine, coiling around their chest. It was subtle at first, but relentless. The presence wanted acknowledgement. It wanted fear. It wanted engagement. The outsider's instincts screamed to flee, yet they stood rooted, caught between awe and terror. There was no question that whatever existed here was intelligent. It had a history, a memory, and a malice so profound that it seemed to seep from the soil itself. The vapor over the foundation thickened and spread, darkening into strands of smoky black, curling like elongated fingers. They reached toward the trees, brushing against the ground, and occasionally lifting into the air, floating with impossible grace. The strands coalesced at points, forming vague outlines of limbs, torsos, and faces, though they remained insubstantial. The outsider's breathing quickened. Every instinct screamed to look away, yet something compelled them to stare. Every fiber of their being understood that this was the Bell Witch, or whatever had become of her, manifesting in a form that bridged the realms of the living and the spectral. The strands swirled faster, circling the foundation, tightening around the stones like a constricting serpent. The humming beneath the ground became a roar. It was no longer simply a pulse, it was a song of awakening, resonating with the ancient terror of the place. The outsider stumbled, nearly falling onto the damp grass. They could feel the weight of attention, a consciousness pressing into their skull. It wasn't merely observing, they could feel the presence sizing them up, testing boundaries, calculating reaction times, measuring fear. A subtle vibration ran through the air. The darkness in the clearing seemed to thicken, solidifying into shapes that hovered just beyond comprehension. Faces, no masks, appeared and vanished. Limbs stretched unnaturally, defying the geometry of flesh and bone. It was a nightmare given form, yet tethered to reality through the foundation stones. The outsider realized the truth. This was not just a haunting. It was an intelligence, a predator, an echo of rage that had survived the centuries, learning patience, and waiting for the right moment to assert itself. Suddenly, the black strands shot outward from the foundation, not with violence but with intent. They brushed past the outsider, trailing across their arms and legs like cold, wet fingers. The sensation made their skin crawl. It was as if the presence was tasting them, weighing the boundaries between body and spirit. The outsider's knees buckled, forcing them to crouch. Every inhale felt like a battle. The mist and vapor swirled around them, coiling tighter with each breath, constricting space until the clearing seemed impossibly small, the trees looming over like towers in a nightmare city. Then the hum stopped abruptly. The forest fell into a dead silence so complete it was deafening. The stranger gasped, expecting the pressure to vanish, but it did not. Something had changed. The presence now lingered in full focus, invisible yet undeniable. The air grew icy, turning moisture in their breath into faint clouds. Their heart raced in tandem with the echoes in the soil. They wanted to flee, but their body refused. The will of the presence was subtle but unrelenting. It pressed against their spine, guiding, coercing, tethering. The outsider understood that leaving without acknowledgement was impossible. Something demanded to be seen, to be experienced, to mark a new chapter in its story. From the edge of the clearing, the surrounding forest seemed alive. Trees twisted toward the clearing as if responding to the presence. Shadows in the underbrush shifted independently of moonlight, forming figures that flitted just beyond sight. Eyes, not human, not fully animal, blinked open in the darkness, reflecting what little light there was. The forest itself had become a sentinel, watching, ensuring the outsider did not stray too far. The black strands thickened, coiling higher, climbing toward the treetops before curling back to the ground. The presence was expanding, extending its influence beyond the foundation and into the land itself. Every step the outsider attempted seemed anticipated, every breath mirrored in the pulse of the earth beneath them. The outsider felt trapped, not by walls or fences, but by a consciousness that had learned to manipulate perception, to fold space with intent. The very clearing had become a cage, invisible yet absolute. The sense of being watched, stalked, and measured pressed into their chest until it hurt. At the far end of the property lay the old well, long sealed and avoided. The outsider had noticed it earlier but not considered it central. Now it pulsed with a dark energy, a low vibration traveling up through the ground and into their feet. The presence's strands stretched toward it, disappearing momentarily into the mouth of the well before returning, thicker and darker than before. The air above the well shimmered slightly, distorting the moonlight. The soil around it shifted subtly, forming faint depressions that hinted at movement beneath the surface. The outsider felt drawn to it, a magnetic pull that went beyond curiosity or reason. Their pulse synced with the thrum coming from below, a heartbeat that was not their own but somehow familiar. Stepping closer, they noticed a faint pattern in the dust, a spiral radiating outward, aligning with the foundation stones. It was deliberate, calculated, waiting. The well was not just a location. It was a focus, a conduit for something ancient and patient, something that had survived the Bell family and the centuries that followed. The outsider reached the well cautiously, every muscle taut. The mist from the foundation rolled slowly toward them, clinging to their clothing like living tendrils. The humming from beneath the soil intensified, now accompanied by a subtle vibration in the air, a low-frequency resonance that made teeth ache and stomachs turn. The presence was aware of their approach, anticipating each step, each twitch of fear. Shadows peeled away from the foundation stones and moved toward the well. They twisted, coiling around one another, forming grotesque, humanoid shapes. Not fully formed, not solid, but terrifying in their intent. They leaned closer, bending reality around them, tugging subtly at the outsider's perception. The night seemed to deepen, darkness pooling in the corners, stretching beyond natural limits. The outsider's hand shook as they reached for their recorder, which pulsed faintly, synchronized to the earth's heartbeat. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet fascination, dangerous, irrational fascination, kept them rooted. They had come to document the Bell Witch, to witness, to survive long enough to tell the story. But the story had found them first. And it was no longer content to remain in whispers. The outsider's breath caught as the black strands began to rise from the foundation in a slow, deliberate ascent. They twisted and coiled, forming impossible angles, elongating as if reaching toward the sky. The vibration beneath the soil became a low, rolling pulse, shaking the clearing subtly yet insistently. The ground itself seemed to shiver, aware of the presence moving above it. A sudden gust of cold air whipped through the field. It carried a faint metallic scent, mingled with the damp decay of the forest. The strands twisted tighter around the foundation stones, pulling at them as though they were anchors for something immense, something that had been held captive too long. The outsider felt a tug at the edge of their mind, a sensation of being measured, weighed, and found significant. It was not fear alone. It was a recognition, a presence asserting intelligence. The Bell Witch, or what she had become, was not dormant. She was calculating, emerging, shaping the very night into her form. The mist that had once been passive now writhed aggressively. It climbed the outsider's legs, curling around their arms, creeping toward their chest. The air thickened with a suffocating density, as though gravity itself had shifted. Each inhale felt heavy, each exhale strained. The moonlight above dimmed slightly, refracted through the vapor, creating false shadows that danced across the field. The hum beneath the soil became a chant-like rhythm, vibrating in the chest, rattling the teeth. It was no longer merely sound. It was force. A pressure wave that pressed the bones together and made the nerves vibrate. The earth, the trees, the stones, even the air itself seemed to pulse in unison with an entity older than the forest, older than the land itself. The outsider's vision blurred as the pressure intensified, every instinct screaming to flee. But their feet remained rooted. They were a witness. And in this place, being a witness came with consequences. From every corner of the clearing, the shadows began to converge. They peeled away from the underbrush, the trees, and the soil itself, forming grotesque shapes that hovered, coiling and stretching as though testing the boundaries of reality. Faces appeared and vanished in rapid succession, elongated, hollow-eyed, screaming in silence. Limbs bent at impossible angles, moving with a predatory grace. The strands from the foundation lifted and merged with these shadows, forming a twisting, towering mass above the stones. The form was humanoid but not human. Its proportions were exaggerated, limbs impossibly long, head cocked at angles that defied anatomy. The black mist twisted like hair in an invisible wind. Every movement radiated purpose, a silent assertion of intelligence, of history, of wrath. The outsider's body trembled uncontrollably. A shiver crawled along their spine, but the sensation was not fear alone. It was understanding. Whatever had risen from this place was aware. It remembered. It had waited for centuries, and now it was awake. The twisted form leaned closer, or perhaps the field itself bent inward toward the outsider. The strands reached toward them, trailing across the grass, brushing their clothing with icy tendrils that burned like frostbite. The vibration from beneath became unbearable, syncing perfectly with the outsider's racing heartbeat. They tried to back away, but the forest shifted subtly, guiding their steps back into the clearing toward the foundation. Every instinct screamed escape, yet every movement led them deeper into the center. The presence was drawing them in, not with force, but with inevitability. The mist coiled around their legs, wrapping, lifting, as though encouraging them to kneel. The heartbeat beneath the soil roared now, louder than any human heart could survive. It pressed against their consciousness, whispering histories of suffering, of rage, of revenge left incomplete. The outsider's vision began to distort. Shapes overlapped, shadows became solid, and the world seemed to fracture along invisible lines. They understood then that the bell, which was not a spirit, not a ghost, not a memory. She was the land itself animated, reshaped into a consciousness, and she had decided the outsider was hers to witness. The black tower of strands swelled. It stretched beyond the treetops, its limbs twisting outward, shaping the night into a living nightmare. The foundation stones glowed faintly red as though burning from within. The field quaked, small cracks spiderwebbing outward from the stones, emitting low groans of pressure and stress. From the edge of the forest, figures moved, barely perceptible, blending with shadows, circling the clearing. The wind returned briefly, carrying faint whispers that were not words but thoughts, messages of warning, of menace, of invitation. Every fiber of the outsiders being screamed danger. Every instinct told them to run. But the magnetic pull of the presence, the inevitability of witnessing, held them firmly in place. The mist surged higher, enveloping the outsider in cold, tangible darkness. Their recorder vibrated violently, emitting distorted static that echoed the heartbeat below. Every sense became overloaded. They were aware of the grass beneath their fingers, the rough bark of a nearby tree, the acrid taste of fear in their mouth. And through it all, the presence pressed, coiled, and observed. With a final, subtle tremor, the black mass solidified in ways the mind could barely comprehend. It no longer resembled smoke or vapor or strands. It was now fully a presence, fully aware, fully awake. Though shapeless in parts, it radiated consciousness so intense that reality itself seemed to bend around it. The clearing was no longer simply a field. It was a stage, an altar, a space crafted to showcase power and malice. The outsider collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed yet alive. The presence tilted its head toward them, not to strike, not to harm, but to acknowledge. It was done asserting its arrival. It had awakened, and it had made the outsider witness to its rebirth. For a moment the night was still. The earth no longer throbbed. The shadows receded slightly, though they never fully disappeared. The mist dissipated into thin wisps, curling like the last exhalations of a storm. And the bell witch, now whole again, lingered invisibly in the night, her influence woven into every stone, every blade of grass, every whisper of wind. The outsider rose unsteadily, looking over the clearing. The foundation stones were intact. The well appeared dormant. The forest had returned to its natural form. The mist was gone. Even the black strands had vanished. Yet the feeling remained. A weight, a pressure, a memory etched into their consciousness. The outsider knew that nothing had truly ended. The bell witch was no longer fully tied to the foundation. She had risen, she had awakened, and the land would carry her influence far beyond the boundaries of the bell property. The outsider returned home, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow in their room seemed to twitch unnaturally, bending toward them. The events of the bell property pressed against their thoughts like a second layer of reality. The black mist, the shifting shadows, the pulse of the soil, it all lingered in their mind, persistent, invasive, refusing dismissal. Even in the well-lit streets of the town, something felt wrong. Every corner carried faint traces of darkness. Every alley whispered in the tone of memory rather than wind. The outsider's breath came fast. They moved through familiar streets with caution, acutely aware that their perception had changed. They were attuned now. Their senses had been calibrated to a reality most humans ignored. At home, the recorder they had left on the table vibrated faintly. Static hissed softly, and then silence. It was as if the bell witch had imprinted herself into even the smallest objects, claiming space and attention beyond the property. Sleep eventually overtook the outsider, but it brought no relief. Nightmares unfolded, blending memories with impossible visions. The black strands, the twisting shadows, the faceless forms, they followed, circling, waiting for the chance to reassert themselves. And she had not forgotten. Back at the bell property, the forest waited. Days passed, but the land remained restless. The grass flattened in winding circles. Trees leaned in impossible ways, branches twisting at unnatural angles. Soil that should have settled remained subtly raised, forming mounds that shifted as if something crawled just beneath. Even the well seemed different, darker than before, vibrating faintly with the rhythm of some unseen pulse. Locals who dared pass near the property noted subtle oddities. Dogs refused to enter the clearing. Birds avoided the trees, their calls ceasing abruptly as the sun sank. Even distant travelers claimed to hear whispers carried on the wind, too soft to decipher, yet unmistakably human in origin, yet not. The bell witch had extended her influence. Awareness had left the clearing and begun to seep into the surrounding forest, hunting in silence, watching, learning, waiting. The outsider would feel this too, though not yet. The outsider awoke in the dead of night. Moonlight spilled across their bedroom floor, illuminating furniture and belongings, but not the shadows. The darkness along the walls seemed deeper, stretching farther than it should, pooling into corners. Every instinct screamed danger, but the outsider understood instinct alone would not suffice. This was not a dream, nor merely fear. This was a continuation. They attempted to rise, to leave the room, but the air had changed. It pressed in against them, thick and cold. Static hummed faintly, tugging at the hairs on their arms and the edges of their mind. The room seemed to pulse in tandem with a heartbeat that did not belong to them, slow and deliberate, like a predator waiting before the strike. A whisper brushed past their ear, too subtle to understand, yet filled with intent. They froze. The presence had reached beyond the bell property, into their reality. It was patient, careful, aware that any sudden movement could provoke withdrawal or escalation. The outsider realized then that leaving the property had not been enough. Whatever had awakened was free, and it remembered them. Several nights later, the outsider returned to the bell property, compelled by obsession, fear, or necessity. The clearing was silent, deceptively so. Moonlight fell across the foundation stones, revealing a landscape subtly altered. Grass flattened in concentric patterns. Branches had shifted positions slightly. The well pulsed faintly, an almost imperceptible tremor beneath the soil. The outsider felt the weight of the land immediately. Every step brought a subtle resistance, an invisible friction that pressed against their movements. The trees leaned closer, subtly reshaping themselves to guide the outsider toward the center. The forest itself had become a sentient extension of the Bell Witch, anticipating, shaping, observing. Shadows moved independently of light. They stretched along the ground, twisted in impossible angles, and curled around roots and rocks. It was as if the very air carried a memory of horror, coiling in anticipation of events yet to unfold. The outsider's pulse quickened. The vibrations beneath the soil had returned, subtle at first, then building into a deep, resonant thrum. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was tracked, mirrored, anticipated. Something waited in the clearing. Not visible, not fully formed, but aware. The outsider approached the foundation cautiously. Mist hung low over the stones, curling and shifting in slow, deliberate motions. The black strands had returned, weaving across the grass like living ink. They were thinner now, subtler but deliberate. Every movement suggested intelligence, intent, a plan forming beyond comprehension. The hum beneath the soil pulsed with growing intensity, syncing with the rhythm of the outsider's heart. The field itself seemed alive, quivering as if sensing the outsider's fear. Shadows peeled from the surrounding trees, stretching across the clearing, entwining with the strands. The outsider understood with stark clarity that the Bell Witch had learned. Patience had become strategy. Observation had become stalking. She was no longer confined to the foundation. She had expanded, and her influence now encompassed the clearing, the forest, and potentially anything that dared enter her domain. The night thickened, the forest breathing in synchrony with her awakening. The outsider's steps faltered as the black strands swirled faster, stretching upward and outward, brushing against the air as though testing its density. Each strand pulsed faintly, alive with energy, vibrating in harmony with a low hum from beneath the soil. The clearing had become a cage, and the outsider understood that every movement was anticipated. There was no escape, at least not without acknowledgement. Branches above rustled despite the absence of wind. The trees creaked and bent subtly, forming arches and tunnels that funneled the outsider toward the foundation. Shapes flickered in the periphery, humanoid yet impossible, eyes blinking where eyes could not exist, limbs bending at angles nature did not allow. The outsider's breath came shallow and fast. Their heart raced, pounding in rhythm with the low thrum from the earth. Each pulse carried weight, a sensation of being watched, weighed, and measured. The Bell Witch was not a ghost. She was a force, patient and aware, extending tendrils of influence through the very air, shaping perception itself. The mist rose higher, weaving around the outsider's legs and torso, brushing their arms with icy tendrils that burned and numbed simultaneously. The strands seemed to taste them, trace the edges of their fear, coil around the contours of their body as if absorbing the essence of their presence. The outsider's gaze was drawn to the old well, now pulsing faintly like a heartbeat in tandem with the earth. The black strands retreated toward it, converging, thickening, curling upward into the air in a dark tornado of vapor and shadow. The vibration beneath the soil increased, rising from subtle hum to deep, resonant roar. A pressure wave radiated outward from the well, pressing the outsider to their knees. They felt as though the ground itself were alive, shaping reality around the source. Each step toward the well became heavier, the air thickening until it was almost solid. The mist pressed against their face, obscuring vision, yet the outsider could sense the depth of the presence below. It was not merely alive. It was aware. It had been waiting centuries for someone to return, someone to witness its rebirth, someone to anchor it to the world of the living again. The well seemed to pulse in reply, sending tremors through the soil that resonated in the bones, vibrating the teeth, rattling the chest. A soft hiss, faint but deliberate, whispered from within, carrying syllables the mind could not comprehend yet felt familiar, intimate, ancient. The outsider's body shivered as the awareness pressed closer, stretching the boundaries of their perception. The bell which had learned patience, calculation, and cunning over centuries. She was now a predator in her domain, and the clearing was her hunting ground. The black strands lifted fully from the soil, weaving upward into the night sky. Their form coalesced into a tall, humanoid shape, impossibly elongated, faceless yet aware, limbs bending in angles that defied comprehension. Each movement radiated intent, a silent announcement of consciousness. The mist spiraled around it, climbing into its form, binding it to the clearing, shaping air and darkness alike. Shadows from the trees converged, merging into the mass, forming additional limbs, additional faces, additional eyes that blinked independently yet as one. The outsider felt an oppressive weight descend upon them. The pulse from beneath the soil matched their heartbeat perfectly, like a predator syncing with prey. Each vibration, each movement of the strands, each whisper of the wind seemed designed to reinforce a singular truth. The bell which had returned in form and awareness, and there was no escaping her presence. The clearing itself seemed to bend, tilting subtly, the ground rising and falling in waves. Branches bowed unnaturally toward the mass, as if in homage. Every element of the forest had become a participant, not merely an observer. The outsider could not speak, could not move, could only bear witness to the culmination of centuries of rage and memory made conscious. Knees pressed into the damp earth, the outsider tried to comprehend the scale of what stood before them. This was no simple haunting, no residual memory of human grief or malice. This was a synthesis of land, memory, and hatred given form. The vibrations grew sharper, penetrating deeper, echoing within the skull and spine. Every nerve fired with the awareness of the presence, a sensation that was both intimate and invasive. The outsider's mind struggled to distinguish the self from the space around them. Shadows bent reality, mist shifted perception, and the pulse of the earth pressed a claim on consciousness itself. The figure leaned slightly forward, not with malice, not with physical intent, but with pure focus. Its attention alone was a weapon, a psychic anchor forcing the outsider into the present, forcing acknowledgement, forcing witness. The clearing had become a stage. The outsider, the black tower of strands, and the pulsating earth beneath were players in a performance with no exit. With sudden subtlety, the ground beneath the foundation shifted. Thin cracks spider-webbed outward, rising in miniature ridges, like veins awakening in the earth. The black strands twisted and descended into the cracks, merging partially with the soil, yet retaining their dark, writhing form. The mist thickened into solid shapes, pressing against the outsider, coiling around ankles and torso. The pulse beneath the soil rose in volume, vibrating through the grass and stones until the clearing itself felt alive, as though the earth were breathing and aware. The bell which was no longer constrained. She was the clearing, the forest, the soil, and the air. She moved in the patterns of shadows, in the tremors of roots, in the sway of trees. Every step the outsider took seemed both anticipated and irrelevant. They were caught in a loop, a network of perception and control from which escape was impossible unless they understood the rules being rewritten before them. The black tower of strands thickened further, stretching higher than the treetops. It pulsed, spiraled, and twisted, the motion hypnotic, almost organic. Faces, some human, some grotesque, formed and vanished along its body, each expressing a silent scream frozen in time. The mass exuded awareness, as though the essence of centuries of fear and rage had been compacted and given form. The outsider felt a pull toward it, not physical but mental. Their mind tugged forward, curiosity and terror entwined. The strands seemed to guide them, beckon them, promising revelation or destruction. The air vibrated with low hums, whispers, and untranslatable syllables. The pulse beneath the soil, once subtle, now resonated through the clearing with overwhelming insistence. The outsider's knees dug into the grass as the black tower of strands leaned closer, swaying with a deliberate grace that defied physics. The mist thickened, forming semi-solid coils that brushed their arms and legs, cold yet burning with an unnatural energy. The heartbeat beneath the soil roared, shaking the clearing, rattling the stones, vibrating the very bones of the outsider. The figure was no longer a mere manifestation of memory. It was fully aware, fully awake, fully alive, a predator of perception and space. It bent the rules of reality with subtle motions, folding the clearing in upon itself in ways the outsider could feel but not see. Branches bent unnaturally, shadows stretched endlessly, and the earth quivered as though in obeisance. The outsider understood. Fleeing was no longer an option. Witnessing was now participation. Every heartbeat, every breath, every shiver reinforced the presence's dominance. Resistance was meaningless. The bell witch was in control, and the clearing had become her stage. The pulse beneath the soil intensified into a deafening roar, shaking the very ground. Cracks snaked outward from the foundation, thin yet deep, resembling veins of living rock. The black strands merged partially into these fissures, feeding into the earth itself, reinforcing their connection. The outsider's senses were overwhelmed. Every step, every twitch, every heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the awakened entity. Time seemed to dilate. Seconds stretched into eternities. Every movement was anticipated. Every thought mirrored. The forest around the clearing no longer seemed separate. It breathed with the presence. It waited with the presence. The bell witch was not confined to her previous domain. She had become the clearing, the forest, and the soil, an entity of perception, patience, and malice. The outsider realized fully. She did not want their body. She wanted acknowledgement, witness, validation. To exist in this world once more, fully awake, fully realized, fully feared. A subtle pressure ran through the outsider's body, not physical but mental, a pull that forced focus and fear simultaneously. The strands wrapped around perception itself, guiding the eyes, tugging at thought patterns, and feeding on terror. The mist swirled around the head, coiling like invisible fingers, brushing the face, teasing the mind with whispers that were half memory, half threat. The clearing itself tilted subtly, and the ground beneath the outsider's knees seemed to fold, rising in small, deliberate waves, guiding them toward the foundation. There was no malice in the touch. Only demand. Only insistence. Only awareness. She did not strike. She simply claimed the space, and the outsider became an extension of her stage. The black tower of strands pulsed violently, expanding outward and upward. Faces appeared, some human, some distorted, screaming silently. Limbs bent impossibly. Shadows twisted and intertwined, merging with the mist and rising soil. The clearing itself seemed to exhale in unison with the pulse, and the night trembled with energy that had not existed for centuries. The outsider felt consciousness bending around them. Space, perception, fear, and reality all became malleable. The presence was fully awake, fully alive, fully aware, and fully victorious. The bell which had risen once more, not as memory, not as haunting, not as shadow, but as a force patient and eternal. For a moment the clearing was silent. Pulse stopped. The forest held its breath. Then the mist dissipated slightly, and the presence receded. Not gone, but observing, waiting, and integrating the outsider's witness into its essence. The outsider rose slowly, shaking. The clearing appeared normal again, though the memory of the pulse, the strands, the twisting shadows lingered in the mind like a physical weight. The foundation stones sat in pale moonlight, the well pulsing faintly, a reminder of what had awakened. No animals dared enter the clearing. The forest remained silent, watchful. The land itself seemed different, subtly charged with something unseen. The bell which had expanded her domain. She had learned patience, cunning, and strategy. She would not leave. She would not forget. She would continue to exist, waiting for those who dared enter her world. The outsider left the clearing once more, stepping onto neutral soil. Relief washed over them, but it was tempered by a profound realization. The bell which had not been defeated. She had simply risen, and the world beyond the clearing now belonged in part to her influence. From the edge of the forest, a shadow flickered. Not fully solid, not fully absent. A hand-like strand reached from the tree line, brushing the grass in a slow, deliberate motion before retreating. The pulse beneath the soil had quieted, but the clearing remained alive with memory and presence. The outsider looked back one final time. The stones, the well, the twisting shadows, they all seemed to watch in silence. The bell which had claimed the clearing, she had awakened fully. And somewhere in the forest, beyond comprehension, she waited for her next witness. The outsider walked into the night, carrying the memory of the awakening, the weight of what they had seen, and the certainty that the legend was no longer mere story. The bell which does not rest. He does not sleep. She waits, patient and eternal, in places the world has forgotten. If this story left you unsettled, if the shadows feel just a little too close, and if you wish to explore the darkest corners of the world alongside us, subscribe to Silent Scream Chronicles, where whispers are never idle, where shadows hold memory, and where the night is only the beginning.